Hi, everyone. I'm Rose Gerber, the Director of Patient Advocacy and Education for the Community Oncology Alliance. Thank you for joining us today. For those of you who are new to our monthly advocacy chat, I want to give you a quick snapshot about what they are and what our goal is. We like to bring you timely, topical information that's going on in the national landscape, and we bring you expert speakers to share that information with you. But before I get to our very special guest, who you can see her on screen, Shelly Fuld Nasso from the National Coalition of Cancer Survivorship. I also like to use this opportunity to give you some updates from our own organization, which we are an industry leader in the issue of community oncology care, with the majority of our cancer providers providing care for the majority of cancer patients. So a very big issue right now that's very concerning to COA and to not just oncologists, but to physicians everywhere, is something that has occurred during COVID, is that we have seen a decrease in patients getting preventive screenings. But let's take it back a step. What happened when COVID first struck for all of us across the country, across the world, is many of us had to follow shelter-in-place orders, which was absolutely the right thing to do. And if you're a cancer patient, you're not only physically vulnerable, you're emotionally vulnerable, and probably Shelly might talk about that today too. There's a lot of issues that impact patients, not just the physical issues, but the emotional issues. So going back and to get your cancer treatment was very scary. And even though we've talked about this in the past, our community oncologists did a phenomenal job in following safety protocols, making sure that their cancer centers were extremely safe in terms of social distancing and limiting the number of people that could be in a waiting room, for example. There was still, concern for patients in active treatment to come back. But as we've unfortunately kind of settled into living with a pandemic, our frontline physicians started to notice that they were seeing a decrease in new patients coming in, and their inclinations were correct. Our organization just posted a very insightful report from Avalere Health that you can find on our website, on the landing page of our website, and it discusses the impact of COVID on cancer care. And what we're seeing, again, not just in oncology, but with many specialties, is that even though there was some flatline originally, those numbers aren't coming back up. So unfortunately, patients of all disease types are not going in for preventive care. So for example, mammograms, colonoscopies, and then when they're not going in for these really important preventive screenings, then that means they're not getting the biopsies or surgical procedures that often follow. Now, why is this a patient advocacy issue? Because we all know, in fact, today we're going to talk about 17 million cancer survivors. That's the number of cancer survivors in the US. Is one of the best ways to increase your survivorship odds is to get screened early or hopefully get your cancer treated early. So we have real life stories of our practicing medical oncologists seeing patients who are coming in, but regretfully they're being seen with their cancer already advancing. So that's pretty scary. So to read more about this, you again visit our website and you'll see it right there on the landing page. And of course, every time you go to our website, I want to encourage you to poke around and go to the CPAN site, which you can find through the links. And once you're on our CPAN website, you can go to the Get Involved section. Go everywhere, but definitely go to Get Involved to share your story and sign up for our news bulletin. And keep in mind, a lot of you are already on our mailing list. You're getting the incredibly informative COA newsletter, but the CPAN news bulletin is a separate publication that comes out monthly. And it also has a lot of great resources in that newsletter, in that news bulletin. So for example, this month is actually National Caregivers Month, so you'll see some resources on that topic. But you're all here to not only hear about the COA and CPAN updates, but to hear from our very special guests. As I mentioned, Shelly is the CEO of the National Coalition for Cancer Survivorship. And like many organizations, we have a lot of similarities. There's literally thousands of cancer-specific organizations in the US, but their name gives it away. Their specialty is survivorship. And survivorship is really, really important. Even just the word alone has a lot of different meanings. But one thing that the organization does a lot of great things very well. Shelly has an extensive background in policy, and prior to her role as CEO for NCCS, she was also in a senior leadership position with Susan G. Komen, another organization that I have great respect for. And for those of you who've heard Shelly speak, she is a prominent national speaker. She's also shared her stories of her personal connection to cancer. And I've always said this, that whatever topic it is in life, the more perspectives you have and you bring in personally, or those you surround yourself with, the better informed you're going to be. So it is really my pleasure to have Shelly here today to focus. We could talk about a lot of things, Shelly, because our organizations have so much in common, especially issues around quality cancer care, patient-physician communications. But really, I would love for you to talk about your recent paper, your 2020 survey results on cancer survivorship. And we're all really looking forward to learning from you today, Shelly. And thank you so much for being with us today. And please, the time is all yours.
Great. Thanks so much, Rose, for having me. And I'm really looking forward to actually seeing your report on patients delaying screenings. And I think one of the things I just want to say before I get into talking about our survey is what we've also heard from some of the top experts is that a big concern is people not going to the doctor about suspicious, something that they feel is wrong and they're not going to get addressed. So that they're maybe even a little more concerned about people being diagnosed at later stages because they're not addressing symptoms that they may have than also the preventive screening. So I think that's really important too. And I'm looking forward to reviewing what you all found in your research. But I'm really excited today to share with you a little bit. I'm going to share a taste of what we learned in our State of Cancer Survivorship survey that we did, because we're keeping this to 30 minutes since there's a little bit going on in the world today, and I'm going to keep drinking my coffee because I made the mistake of staying up till 3 o'clock in the morning watching election returns, which was really dumb because there was not an answer, and there's still not an answer, and it wasn't going to change between midnight and 3 in the morning. But I did stay up till 3 in the morning, so I'm still relying on that coffee to keep me going. But our survey, we did survey cancer survivors around the country, and we have a lot of interesting findings. So I'm going to give you some of the highlights here today, but you can definitely go to our website, canceradvocacy.org/survey20, if you want to download the full report and see some of the slides that I'm not going to share today. But if we can get into them, I'll show you a taste of what we heard and kind of the high level findings. Next slide. One more, please. Oh, one more, sorry. Great. Actually, you can go through all of these phases. So what we did, this is our second time to do this national survey. We did it at the end of 2018 and into 2019. And so we learned a lot from our first survey. We wanted to, anytime you do a survey, you kind of raise more questions than you answer. So we wanted to follow up on some of the things that we learned. And we saw a lot of things that were consistent in our second survey, but we started with 15 in-depth interviews with cancer patients and survivors. And we were trying to look at, kind of a range of demographics, but trying to understand what some of their experiences were. And that really helped inform the questions that we asked in our nationwide survey. One of the things we did different this year compared with the previous year, last year, we recruited from our network and a number of other cancer patient advocacy organizations that we work with, sent out the link to the survey and recruited from their network. So everyone who responded in the previous survey, about 1,400, were people who learned about it through some patient advocacy organization. And we know that the people who are reached by our advocacy organizations are not necessarily always representative of all of the cancer patients in the country. And the demographics of our survey bore that out. So this time we recruited two different pools. One was the nationwide sample that really had quotas to make sure it was very representative of the US cancer population. Particularly, we want to make sure we had enough over 65, that we had a good balance between men and women, different types of cancer, different races and ethnicities. So we really use this panel to recruit so that they weren't people necessarily connected to advocacy organizations, but it looked like the population of cancer survivors in the country. We also shared it with our advocates that are connected to us. We're calling them NCCS connected because some are advocates, some are just people who may have followed us on Facebook and learned about it through us, but are not necessarily actively involved in advocates. But we did see some differences between the two groups, which I'll highlight as we go through. Next slide, please. This slide shows you the kind of the demographics of the national sample versus the NCCS connected sample. And it illustrates why it was important to us to have a national sample, because we wanted, first of all, it's harder to get men to do these kinds of surveys. So we had close to 50-50 men and women. It's also harder to get over 65, but we know that's the population of cancer survivors in the country. So that's a big difference there. And then the NCCS Connected group had higher education and socioeconomic status, more likely to have private employers for insurance as opposed to Medicare or Medicaid, and also had better health overall. More likely to say their health was excellent or good. Anything you see that has blue means it's statistically significantly higher, and red means statistically significantly lower. Also, the NCCS Connected sample was more likely to have had chemotherapy, so that may play into some of the answers on some of the side effects. Next slide. So, this is kind of the top level findings that we found. So first of all, on mindset, the doctor knows best mindset about treatment is really the prevailing mindset of cancer patients. And the majority say that they're satisfied with their care. But when you go a layer deeper, there are some cracks in this foundation. And we did find that the people who report being more involved in treatment decisions tend to have more positive post-treatment experiences. In terms of expectations, patients who are connected to a group like NCCS are a different audience. They have higher expectations of their care, and conversely lower satisfaction in some instances, and they're more interested in a range of resources to help them with decision making and self-advocacy. Side effects were very similar across the two groups, although we did see some differences just due to what, as I mentioned, the NCCS sample having more people who've had chemotherapy. But fatigue and mental health continue to be the most common side effects, and the ones that they feel that the survivors who reported in the survey feel like they're getting less help from their healthcare provider. This is very consistent with what we found in our first survey, where people felt like their healthcare team is helping them with the physical side effects much better than with the other side effects that are really their top concerns, the fatigue and the mental health. Now, of course, they may be their top concerns because they're not getting the help, because, you know, when your nausea and vomiting are addressed, it's not a top concern, but those are where they really feel, and even not just during treatment, but long after treatment, those are concerns that survivors have, that they don't feel like they're getting necessarily the help that they need from their healthcare teams, and they don't always bring it up during their post-treatment care.
Shelly, I just want to, if I may, just add a comment on that about the long-term side effects. As cancer survivors, I know we kind of joke about it a lot, like how long as a cancer survivor can you keep using fatigue and chemo brain as an excuse for those days when you're not feeling yourself? But when you stop the joking, you know, it is a very real thing. And so I'm really glad that is reflected here.
Yeah.
There's not really a timeline on it going away. There's not like a magic 5 years, you're going to not be tired anymore and not, you know, have mental issues. Thank you.
And thank you for saying that, because you gave me a chance to get a sip of coffee, which I need because of that 3 a.m. Mistake that I made.
No mistakes. You're a policy person. We would be disappointed if you didn't stay up till 3 a.m., Shelly, okay?
Yeah. Well, one thing I did that was smart was I didn't start watching until like 10:30 or 11 because I knew we wouldn't have answers.
So you control what you can.
Yeah. So I minimized the amount of time I drove myself crazy, but I did stay up late. So as far as concerns, that survivors are concerned about a range of physical health issues and financial issues. And they continue to be areas where they don't get the support from their healthcare team. And then we also asked some questions about what kind of resources they may be interested, just to help us with our thinking about what resources we want to provide and how we tailor our website. So that was some of what we got from patients there. And then there were some demographic differences, and you'll see in the red and blue, there were some key audiences where the post-treatment concerns were higher, and those were younger patients, African-American, Hispanic, women, and then people who've had chemotherapy. Next slide. So this goes to what the first bullet about the treatment decision making. So nationally, most patients said they rely on their doctors to make treatment decisions. So that by almost a 3-to-1 margin, patients said that they relied on their doctor to tell them what treatment was best versus being involved in the research and decision making. And I think this is really important, because this is where we saw the biggest difference between the national sample and then the NCCS Connected sample, where those 3 buckets were much more evenly split in the NCCS bucket. So the connected patients were much more likely to be involved in decision making about their care. And we talk a lot about empowered patients. And a lot of us in cancer patient advocacy spend a lot of time educating patients to be empowered. And that is important, and we still have to do that. But when you look at this, you see that the average cancer patients are more likely to rely on their doctor for decision-making and not necessarily become that empowered self-advocate who's going to get involved in treatment decision-making. So my view is we have to continue empowering patients who want to be empowered, but we need to make sure that we're working on improving the system so that it works for everyone. That we can't expect patients to be empowered in order to get good care, because there are going to be patients who are never going to be able to be empowered or never going to want to be. Because if you think about facing a diagnosis like cancer, it's a perfectly reasonable approach, even if you have, the resources and the education and the health literacy to just say, I just want to turn this over, like, you tell me what's best, and not be as actively involved. And everybody approaches their experience in a different way. And so I just want to make sure that we remember that, because I feel like so much of what I hear is about empowered patients. And I just want to make sure that we have to kind of look at this on two tracks, empowering patients, but also working on making sure the system works for everyone, even the patients who are never going to be empowered like that.
Shelly, I really, really like your emphasis on that, because I've seen that, with cancer patients across the US, and something that happens, especially now in the times we live in with social media, the loudest voice is not the only voice. And that's what I keep saying. Like, people will say, Rose, I know a lot of great patient advocates, and they are a phenomenal advocate, but not every outspoken advocate is the true patient voice. Or I know someone with a really moving story. I know so many patients with incredible moving stories. Some of them, they're never going to get in front of a microphone. They're never going to get on a webinar. And they, like you said, Shelly, they might just choose to defer to their doctor, and that doesn't make them any less deserving of the best care. So really, really great emphasis you put on that. Thank you.
Yeah. And I love that. I'm going to borrow that quote, Rose, the loudest voice is not the only voice. And it is right. And we shouldn't make judgment. We shouldn't say, well, they don't want to be empowered. Well, because they're facing a horrible, diagnosis, and it's challenging. And sometimes the way to handle that is just to put your faith in your doctor and say, take care of me. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's a valid approach. And that's why you see, too, a lot of patients are not necessarily as interested in getting a second opinion or, in going to, the academic medical center when they feel comfortable with the person that they, a lot of times it's just about that relationship, not about the expertise and, or, getting the most cutting edge. And that's because it's such an emotional, situation, and you want to feel good about who's taking care of you.
And it truly is an intimate experience. I mean, your physicians are literally seeing you nude sometimes.
Yeah,
it's very intimate.
Yeah. Okay, next slide. So we also found, and again, the blue means statistically significantly higher. I really always have a hard time with those two words together, that patients who are involved in treatment decisions report feeling better prepared for their post-treatment care than people who rely on their doctors. So, while we may want patients to be involved in decisions about their care, and it may help improve their outcomes, that it's not always going to be the case. Next slide. So most cancer patients believe their healthcare teams are doing a good job coordinating their care, but here's again where you can see the difference, as I mentioned, that the connected patients have a little bit higher expectations and conversely a little bit lower satisfaction with how well their care is being coordinated. But you can see that, between very well and somewhat well, most patients are feeling that their providers are doing a good job coordinating their care. I think I was a little surprised by this, to be honest, because you hear a lot of patients talking about how they really have to be the one who's coordinating all the different parts of their care team. But this was how they responded to that question. Next slide. So fatigue and depression, and I think there's more to this slide. So if you can keep going to show the rest of that table. Yes, thank you. So this is the top 12 symptoms that patients experienced in order, and then who reported them. And so you can see some of the differences and some of the areas where different groups reported higher or lower instances of these side effects. So fatigue and depression being the top two. But you can see now, interesting, I was very interested in this finding. Across the board, our over 65 respondents had less concerns about when we look at one of the other slides, which I may not even be in here, but in the other report where we had a big list of concerns, they were lower on all of them. And I think, there's a kind of I think some of it has to do with just their generation and they've had a lot of lived experience and things maybe bother them less. I think some of it may have to do with having good insurance and having Medicare. But it was interesting to me that, almost all of the, not all of the side effects here, but then another question we asked about their concerns, which were some physical, some emotional, some financial, and the over 65 were lower on all of them. But then you can see, as I mentioned before, that we have some groups that were higher in some of these areas. But these were the top areas. And again, as I mentioned,
Shelly, I
fatigue and
want to just
depression.
mention something about this slide too.
Yeah.
And I normally don't like to get graphic, trust me, and so I won't get overly graphic. But one of the symptoms where you have the nausea, vomiting, people can read the rest of the slide. It's really great that that's there, because something that I'm very sympathetic about for especially newly diagnosed patients is cancer, unfortunately, is so common that it's very easy to minimize the cancer experience. And people say, oh, if you get cancer now, the drugs are not as strong as they used to be and the symptom management is much easier. Talk to someone who's actually been through treatment. They are still experiencing these type of issues with nausea and vomiting and just the physical stuff that patients go through. And when I look at the slide, it really, I hope, paints a picture of what patients actually go through.
Yeah. And I think, if we didn't, this would probably be a lot higher too, if we didn't have effective, treatments for it. I remember when my uncle was going through chemotherapy, he was like, I went with him to an appointment. He said to his oncologist, yeah, I didn't even have any nausea or vomiting. And he's like, well, that's why you were in the chair for so many hours, because we gave you the antiemetics and that, we helped you make sure that you didn't.
Yes.
So it's not always control, but I think, if we didn't have those tools to try to help address those side effects, that number would be even higher. Mm-hmm. Next slide, please. So when you go a layer deeper, when you asked about, again, these same top 12 symptoms, we asked if your healthcare team is very helpful in dealing with it. Then you saw some of the numbers being lower, particularly on they're higher on the nausea and vomiting and on the skin irritation and dermatologic problems. That's, again, consistent with what we found in our previous survey, but again, lower on some of the less concrete physical side effects like the fatigue, the depression, anxiety, loss of appetite, muscle and joint pain, and things like that. Next slide. So when we talked about the transition to post-treatment, about half of patients said that they felt very prepared, and then 40% said somewhat prepared. And you can see in blue the folks that had felt a little bit more prepared, the stage 1, the people who did not have chemotherapy, people over 65, and then the over 65 also were more likely to say that, or were less likely to say that they were not prepared. Next slide. So during the post-treatment, the transition to post-treatment, this kind of shows what patients talked about with their doctor and what kind of information that they received, or that at least they recall receiving. And then one of the things that we think is important is a survivorship care plan, and you can see that only 17% of patients got that, and there was a difference there with the NCCS connected patients, where 28% received a survivorship care plan. Next slide. And then the top concerns for survivors were about some of the physical health issues, the future, and the cost of medical care. So maintaining a healthy weight and getting enough exercise were the top two. And then being there for friends and family, the cost of medical care, and again, having energy to make it through the day. And next slide, and I believe this is the last one. So this is a complicated slide, but what we did, we took the concerns, which were a little different from the physical side effects because they included some physical, some emotional, some medical. And then, so these are the top concerns that patients said. And then the top line is how concerned are you? And then the bottom bar is how helpful was your hair, or how many said that their care team was very helpful in addressing. So there's where you can see kind of that gap between how significant the concern is and how helpful the care team is in addressing. And again, where there's a big gap there is the healthy weight and exercise. And I know there's a lot of research on this, a lot of evidence that maintaining a healthy weight helps reduce recurrence for many people, but patients aren't feeling necessarily like they're getting the support they need to do that. And so I think this is a really important one. And you know, all of these are below 36% where they feel like their care team is very helpful, even though these are significant concerns for patients. So that's a taste of our findings, and left a few minutes for questions. And then you can always find the rest of the findings on our website again at canceradvocacy.org/survey20.
Shelly, this is really great information. And I know we started off by saying that there's 17 million cancer survivors.
Yeah.
And it's really phenomenal that there's so many cancer survivors. We are living longer. We have more resources available to us. But the fact, I believe you do this every 2 years. Is this how often you conduct?
We're going to do it every year, and we are planning to do it next year. And we're already, you know, again, as I said, like doing this, you raise a lot of new questions, and we've already been thinking about the questions we want to ask next year.
Right. And I think it's just such an important reminder of what patients live through, because again, there's a lot of attention and focus on the newly diagnosed, and rightly so. That is when you're most emotionally vulnerable, you're most physically vulnerable. Absolutely. But the needs go on. And I know, because we both work with cancer patients every day, is that you feel so lost and alone when nobody else can relate to you. But then when you come to an organization like your organization and you see, oh, there is a lot of other people that can relate to me, you feel normal. And everybody always wants to feel normal. And by the way, this reminded me of a great post that I saw on your own Facebook page, and all of you can go to the NCCS Facebook page as well. And you had a cancer survivor featured, and there was a caption that said, "You look great." And this woman looks just totally perfect and normal. And there's little side bullets that say hair loss, chemo brain, heart problems, neuropathy, bone pain. And I thought it was the most powerful visual. I could 100% relate to that photo. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of cancer patients that could relate to that photo, is that people will see you and you're going to try to pull yourself together, you know, after you go through your treatment, or even as a long-term survivor like myself. And everyone thinks you look fine. And of course, you're going to do your best. You got to function and do a great job in your personal life and professional life, but there's still all those issues. So thank you, Shelly, to you and your organization for doing such impactful work. And I always enjoy your events, whether they're live in DC, which I hope to get back to,
yes,
or having you join us. A lot of great respect for all of your personal and professional accomplishments as well. So thank you for joining us, Shelly. And if I could now have the next slide, please. Again, we invite you back every month, 30 minutes. We go fast, we talk fast, but you leave with a lot of great information. And you can say, hey, today I got to listen to Shelly Fuld Nasso, the CEO of NCCS. We talked about survivorship, but unfortunately, not everybody does survive cancer. So we're going to shift gears a little bit, or quite a bit, next month. And it's still going to be a very hopeful topic. Our friend and colleague, Dr. Patel, has recently published a book called Between Life and Death, From Despair to Hope. And he has a lot of personal, obviously passionate interest in end-of-life care. And this is going to be a very great topic. And he's one of my favorite physicians. So I hope you can join us next month. And thank you again, Shelly, for being with us today, and all of you attendees. Shelly, one more thing?
Yeah, I want to say one thing. So Dr. Patel is amazing. And I have a copy of his book. I've read a chapter of it. I'm going to keep reading it. But we are also going to be interviewing him about his book and about his, you know, really passionate care for people, for end-of-life care and helping patients that aren't going to survive this disease. We're interviewing him for our Cancer Policy Roundtable, which is November 19th, and that's on our website, canceradvocacy.org, if you want to sign up.
Yeah.
But he's going to be part of that, because he sent me a copy of his book, and I just, it's very moving, and I think it's something we don't talk about enough. So I'm excited to interview him about that.
And he truly is a wonderful person and a wonderful friend, and we're all very proud of Dr. Patel. He's very widely known, but the incredible thing about COA is there's so many of the doctors that I get to work with are like Dr. Patel. They're just amazing, phenomenal, and truly care about their patients. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and join us next month. Thank you again, Shelly.